friends, my name is Jess and I'm the artist behind Art by Panzer, and I am so excited to be a part of the summer workshop. So Peggy Dean from the Pigeon Letters has asked some amazing creators to put together classes for this workshop, and I am so honoured to be a part of it and so glad to bring you my class. So today I'm going to show you how to paint this Northern Lights watercolour landscape piece. It looks intimidating, but I'm going to walk you through it step by step, and by the end of this class you'll have your very own piece that you can hang up. So let's get to it. Okay, so before we get into the project, let's start with our materials. So firstly, you will need watercolor paper. So here I'm using Canson XL, which is a cold pressed 300 GSM watercolor paper. For this style of painting, you will need a 300 GSM or something that can handle a lot of paper, keeping in mind that because this is a student grade paper, mainly because it's an inexpensive option for me here in Australia, there will be some buckling, but I've really just learnt how to work with this paper and how to make it work for me. So this pad is 7 by 10, and I've just cut it up into two 5 by 7 pieces just so I get some more use out of it. Next we have our watercolor paints. So today I'm using Daniel Smith watercolor paints, and I'm using Mars Black, or Lunar Black as they call it. I'll be using a phthalo blue turquoise and a Prussian blue, which is going to be a perfect blue for our night sky. Daniel Smith watercolors are artist grade paints. I do prefer to use artist grade paints as you can use less and get a much richer pigment. Feel free to use whatever brand you have available, but if you do just have a black, blue and a turquoise, that'll be perfect for this class. Now on to our paintbrushes. So today I'm using Princeton Heritage round brushes, and you don't have to use this brand if that's not what you have available, but as long as you're using some good quality round brushes, they'll do the job just fine. So this is my larger size, which is a size 8 round. Then I'll also be using a medium size, which is a size 3. And for details, I'll be using a size 0. These are artist grade brushes, and they've really held up to everything that I've put them through over the last couple of years, and I love them, they're great. Now, if you have a flat wash brush available, these are going to be really great for laying down a wash of water on your page. It's not mandatory, it's just helpful. So this is a 1-inch flat wash brush, but if you don't have a flat wash, then you can just use your larger size round brush and it will do the job. Just will take a little bit longer, but that's fine. For the stars, I'm using Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White, which is a really lovely opaque white ink. An alternative here is white acrylic or white gouache. I just would not recommend you use white watercolor because it's transparent and you won't get the effect that we're looking for with the stars. You will need some painter's tape just to tape down your paper to some kind of surface. So I'll be using an MDF clipboard, and this will just help reduce buckling. I bought the painter's tape from my local hardware store and the clipboard from my local office supply store. You'll need some paper towels. You'll need 2 jars of water, 1 clean, 1 dirty. And I'll also be using my heat gun. So this is another tool that's not absolutely necessary, but I don't have the patience to wait for my paint to dry, so this is what I use to dry my paint. So it's just a heat embossing tool. They're fairly cheap and they do last quite a while. They come, it really comes in handy. Now these are also optional, but if you would feel more confident sketching out the landscape portion of the painting before you go ahead and paint it, you can grab a pencil and an eraser. I won't be using these, I'll be freehanding the landscape, but if that's going to make it easier for you, then that's great. So let's move on to some colour swatches. I've already placed my paints in this palette here and left them to dry. So this is what you'll be seeing me use in today's class. So we have the Lunar Black, the Phthalo Blue Turquoise and the Prussian Blue. I prefer to do this because I feel like you get a lot less wastage when you use the pigment straight from the tube. So let's just really quickly swatch this out, swatch these colours. So we have the Mars Black, the Prussian Blue, and Phthalo Blue Turquoise. I do also want to quickly swatch the bleed proof white for you so that you can see what I mean when I'm referring to this as an opaque medium. So I've just drawn a line here in a pigment marker. I'm just going to go over the line with the bleed proof white. And you'll see that this dries essentially as you see it now. Very opaque, you can't really see that black coming through. There is a little bit of resistance from me touching the paper and getting the oils from my skin there, but otherwise it's quite opaque, and I usually just put an amount in the lid and I use that. Alright, so now that we've got our colours, we can move on to the first step of the painting, which is painting the night sky. So I've just taped my watercolour paper down to this MDF clipboard, just using the blue painter's tape that I buy from my local hardware store. You can also use washi tape if that's what you have, but this is a great way to get a nice crisp edge and also to hold your paper down to some kind of surface to prevent buckling. So I'm going to go in with my flat wash brush. You can also use your large round, and I'm just going to wet the paper. Now, when you're wetting the paper down like this, you want to make sure that the water doesn't pool in one area and that you don't have any puddles. That's way too much water for the paper. You want to be sure to have like a nice sheen, but you don't want it to be so wet that it puddles. You can also hold it up to a light source to see what the coverage is like and to make sure that you're happy with it. So using my large round brush, I'm going to grab the Phthalo Blue Turquoise. And this is for our Northern Lights. So I'm not using a reference photo, I'm basically just working off my own knowledge of Northern Lights, which is not technical, it's all just from photos. But essentially I'm just painting a kind of zigzag, like a soft zigzag spiral And you can go back in there a few times. And you can clean up the edges with just some clean water, as watercolor does tend to bloom. I'm just going to pull this out just to soften the edge there. This is going to be covered by the landscape, so don't get too particular here. And I'm basically just going in with the same motion, and with whatever leftover pigment is on my brush, and even just whatever water is on my brush, you're going to get a nice design or a nice effect. So I'm going to now grab some of my black, and I'm going to mix it in this well here. There's already a mixture of black and Prussian blue, but I'll go in and make another. So I just want to start with a real deep, almost like an indigo. And you do want to work fairly quickly because you want all of this to be using the wet on wet technique, as it will be, you'll be sure to get really soft edges and everything will just bleed and melt together. I'm going to pick up Prussian blue. I'm going to start bringing that up. I'm just going over the edges with a clean brush. Just to make sure that there are no harsh lines. I'm going to use my size 3 to add in a bit more phthalo turquoise here. Not a lot. But just to get some color variation. Now with a clean brush, I'll actually use my size 0. I'm just going to get some water on my brush, not so much that it's dripping off, but I'm going to follow the shape, and this will create a nice blooming effect when the water is dropped in. So you can really have fun here. I would be mindful not to overdo this first layer because the watercolor will dry lighter, and you may have to go back in and do a second layer. So I'm going to dry this off now using my heat gun, and then we'll come back and add a second layer if we need to. So as you can see, there has been a bit of a color shift once the paint has dried. This is totally normal with watercolors, and it's why we work in layers. So I'm going to go over and do another layer here, but I want to leave the aurora for now, and I just want to work on the background, on the night sky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my flat wash brush, being very mindful. I'm going to put another layer of water on top of the whole piece so that we don't get any harsh edges. And I'm going to drop color in where I want there to be more color. So you don't want to scrub back and forth or you'll lift what you've already done. Just get some water on your brush and just gently go over. Make sure to clean off your brush in case you get any pigment that's lifted off the page. If you're a bit hesitant to do it this way, by all means, you can just wet the area that you do want to add more color to. So I'm going to grab my Prussian blue and Lunar black mix. I'm going to add more Prussian blue here. And I want to get a bit of water. And I just want to drop in where I want more color. And it's okay to leave a bit of a gap because it will create the illusion of light. And that light can be from the stars or the aurora itself. My paper is drying quite fast because it is a student grade paper, but that's okay. I'm just going to add some more water and soften those edges. So once you're happy with the amount of color that you've put onto the paper for this next layer, you can go ahead and dry it off. And we'll come back and work on the foreground. Okay, so now that the night sky portion of our painting is dried, we're going to start working on the landscape elements. So if you would feel more confident sketching in your landscape, feel free to do that. Just make sure you are very light-handed, and you can even go in with an eraser to make that a bit lighter. And I'm going to do 3 layers. So you want to work from light to dark. So the furthest the mountains that are furthest away from us will be lighter than the one that's closer to us, which will be darker. So I'm going to, over here in my well, I'm going to make a mix of all three colors. So I've already got some Prussian blue here. I'm going to add some turquoise and a little bit of black. Don't need too much here. And I want to add quite a bit of water so that this back layer is it's communicated that it's further away from us. So using my large brush, I'm actually just going to go in and freehand a couple of mountains with water. And I'm going to dip the pigment in. So you want to make sure that there are ridges so that your mountains don't look too straight or like too hard. But that's personal preference, so if that's what you're going for, that's fine. So now I'm going to come in with my color and I'm just going to drop it in along the water. I'll also just create some ridges here. I'm just pulling this water down so that I don't create a hard edge. I'm going to go in with a slightly darker color. So basically I'm just grabbing the color from my well and I'm just going to just tap the brush to the paper towel here to take off some of that water. And I'm going to drop in some more color. And because we're using the wet on wet technique for this, it's going to bloom out and you're going to get some really nice, lovely soft edges. And I'm going to dry this off now with my heat gun and then we'll move on to the second layer. Alright, so you can see that these mountains are quite light, which will communicate that they're far away from us. So I'm going to add some more pigment here so that I get a bit of a mid-range color. And essentially I'm just using less water than I did for the first layer of mountains. So again, I'm going to go in with my large round and I'll create a wet area for me to drop in this color. So I'm going to pick this up and we'll just drop the color in. And because this mountain is closer to us, I'm adding more pigment than I did in the previous one. And I'm just bringing down a couple of ridges. It's looking very turquoise here, so I'm just going to grab some Prussian blue and add it to my mix, just so that that's not too overpowering, or just so, you know, to make sure that it's not blending in too much with the northern lights that I've already painted in. So I'm going to dry this off now, and then we'll work on our last layer of mountains. So the last layer of mountains are going to be much darker than these two. So you can see that we've got a light and a mid-range. So I'm going to grab more black and add it to my mix here. I've lost a bit of that phthalo turquoise from adjusting the color earlier, so I'll add a bit of phthalo turquoise back in too. Now I want to make sure that this foreground mountain is quite dark, so instead of using wet in wet, I'm actually just going to use the wet in dry technique. So I've got lots of pigment on my brush, and I'm just going to go straight in. And I'm just adding color where I see fit. And a little bit of water just so that the paint moves on the paper. If it's too thick, it will be quite difficult, so you just need to find that balance. Alright, and once you're happy with this mountain, you can go in with your heat gun and dry the paint before we move on to our forest. So I'm going to paint a small forest detail here just to fill some space. And to do that, I'm going to be using my smallest brush, which is the round 0, and I'll be using a really thick mixture of black and a bit of phthalo turquoise. So I really don't want to add a lot of water here, just enough water so that the paint will actually load on my brush. And all I want to do here is, using almost a vertical hold, I'm going to draw a straight line to act as the tree trunk, and I'm essentially going to dance my brush around so that I create the trees. So I've got my almost vertical hold here, and I'm not being too precise here. I'm essentially just dabbing my brush around to create an evergreen tree or a pine tree. And I'm going to paint a few. I don't want there just to be one or two. Usually I'll go for an uneven number. Being mindful as well to change the heights so that they're not all the same. And just space them where you see fit. So I'm just going to add a couple more trees here. And then I'll dry this off. Before I add the stars to the night sky, I want to go in with a little bit of detail to the northern lights. So I'm going to grab my small brush and pick up some phthalo turquoise. And I don't want there to be a lot of water or pigment on the brush. And I just want to very lightly add some paint in. So I'm trying to use as vertical of a hold as possible so that it's quite light. And quite thin. And then I'll go in with a bit of water on my brush. And I'm just going to soften it. The reason I'm doing this is just to add a bit of value difference. And I'm just following the curves that I've already laid down for the aurora. Try not to go too overboard with this step. Sometimes messing around too much, or often messing around too much, will ruin the painting. So you just want to be really mindful with kind of how far you go. And you can see here I'm just softening the edges on the paint that I've just put down. So once I'm happy with that bit of detailing that I've added, I'm going to dry this off one last time, and then I'm going to go in and I'm going to add the stars. So I'll dry this off. I'm going to cover this landscape area just with some scrap paper, and we'll have some fun making a mess adding stars. So this is the time to move away any objects or valuables that you don't want to have paint splattered all over, because you will get paint splattered everywhere here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my bleed proof white. I'll grab my medium-sized round brush, and I'm just picking up some of the paint in my brush. I'm going to hold it directly over my painting, and I'm just going to start tapping. I usually do this a few times, and I'll experiment with how much paint I have on my brush, how much water I have on my brush, and you can also have a play around with what size brush you use. The larger the brush, the larger the stars will be. But if you do want a really fine spray of stars, you can go in with your smaller brush, which I'll do now. So I do like to mix up the sizes of the stars here. And I guess theoretically the smaller stars are further away and the larger stars are closer. So there's a little bit of space here that I've missed, and I'm just going to go in and adjust the paper that I've put over my painting or over my landscape, and I'll just focus on those areas with the smaller brush. All right. So there are going to be areas where I do want larger stars, and I want that to be quite purposeful. So I'm actually going to use the end of my paintbrush, and I'm going to get some paint there, and I'm just going to dab a couple of miscellaneous bolder stars. I'll dry this off one last time and we'll add in some final star details. Okay, so using my smallest brush, I'm going to paint in some shining stars and maybe a couple of meteors or shooting stars. If you feel more comfortable doing this with a gel pen or a white paint pen, feel free. But I just like to make sure that I'm at least using my smallest brush, loading it with paint, and to make sure you have a straight edge, you can just go onto your tape and ensure that you've got a straight edge. And using very little pressure, I'll do one cross and then a cross in the middle. So I'll just do a couple of those, and then I'll change it up a little bit I'm going to do a couple that are just little crosses. And to do a couple of shooting stars, I basically just find a point here, hold my brush in the direction that I want to go, and I'm just going to shoot off and draw a straight line. I try not to go back in and play with it. I feel like this is a technique that you kind of get one chance to do it, otherwise it looks strange when you play with it too much. And maybe one more here. So I'll dry this off now, and then we can get rid of the tape and we've got a finished piece. Well friends, there you have it. I hope that you've enjoyed this class today, and I hope that you now have your very own Northern Light landscape piece that you can hang up in your home or in your office, and I would love to see what you've painted. So please share it on Instagram, tag me at @bypanzer, and until next time, see you later.